Hi, my name is Tommy Heffernan, I'm a veterinary consultant, and in this video I am going to talk about the latest product from Precision Microbes, an advanced gut stabilizer for lambs and young kids. So it's our first product in the sheep ovine range, and it is a really exciting one. I'm a veterinary consultant, 20 years of experience. I have to say, of that 20-year career, the most exciting project and products I've got to work with is Precision Microbes because of the results we're seeing, particularly looking at the challenges in a changing environment. I spent a lot of my career working in vet practice, and we were in a large sheep practice, so I've quite an interest in sheep and always have. So I'm going to talk about our new product, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit just to give you background to understand what are the challenges for the young lamb. And the challenge with antibiotics they're not gone, but we're changing our usage. So we're prophylactic use of antibiotics to control disease is gone. So this idea where we give every lamb an oral antibiotic, it has been shifting over the years. We're moving away from that. Certainly antibiotics are available for treatment, but there's new ways of looking at it. So this idea of replacements for antibiotics versus alternative approaches. And I think this is a product that's certainly looking at alternative approaches in quite a bit of detail. And I'll talk about why this product is different. So, newborn lamb challenges, particularly for lambing indoors, really a lot of issues can occur with the yolk pre-lambing, metabolic diseases, poor colostrum quality developing in the udder, if there's parasite issues. And then when we look at the lamb so that's the yolk affecting the lamb in utero, we can have infectious agents like abortions, and then birthing itself. So hard lambings are particularly hard on lambs. We must realize these lambs are born immunonaive, so they have to get their immunity, passive protection from their mothers through colostrum. So that's why we always talk about colostrum. They're of course very prone to hypothermia. They have some fat stores in around their kidneys, brown fat, but we need to get that colostrum into them as a feed source to get them going as well, particularly weaker lambs. Hygiene also, when we bring animals into more intensive setting, particularly in spring lambing where we have a lot of lambs coming, hygiene is a major challenge that I'll talk about, particularly when we look at the gut health perspective and we look at watery mouth and E. coli. So we need to get these lambs going quickly. There's a number of diseases we will be talking about. Just from an animation perspective, I'm going to use different colors. These purple circles represent pathogenic bacteria. So we know bacteria, particularly E. coli, causing watery mouth. We've different bacteria that can cause naval infections. Joint ill is a new challenge. We've clostridial diseases. And of course, in older lambs, we've pneumonia. They're the main infectious diseases we see. Okay, so I'm going to talk about basic principles here around challenges for the young lamb as well. No lamb presentation or any young ruminant presentation is complete without a deep dive in colostrum. But it is essential to continuously remind ourselves why colostrum is so important. In the yolk in particular, it's heavily influenced by prepartum feeding. So we can influence colostrum quality in yolks by looking at the feed pre-lambing. So if we've yolks over-conditioned and we're trying to actually reduce down body condition score, we can actually, negatively impact the lamb and colostrum. So colostrum is brewed or formed in the udders 14 to 7 days before lambing. So having energy and protein right can really improve colostrum quality. So we can measure colostrum quality on farm using a Brix refractometer, and that can be useful. But getting your nutrition right can really influence colostrum quality. Then we look at quantity, and that can be related to genetics, parity, the number of lambs born, but we want to get in a sufficient quantity of colostrum into these lambs as well. And then quickly, so we want that young gut is open, it's exposed, and with the risk of pathogens, we want the lamb getting up and suckling. And we know that there's a number of challenges here around colostrum, but it is the key foundation stone for lamb health. And really, when you look at yolk colostrum, it's really interesting as a percentage of solid. So the protein and fat even is much higher than other species, and that's because the fat is high to get energy into these lambs to get them going, and protein nutritionally. But there's other things, of course, in colostrum. We've these Y guys, these antibodies, so the mother's unique experience of or exposure and memory of disease on farm is passed through colostrum. These antibodies are incredibly important for the young lamb. And there's also these things we'll talk about, prebiotics to prime the young gut. So colostrum is absolutely key. We know about the immunity piece, so we know about the antibodies, we've heard lots about that. We probably haven't heard as much about the actual constituents of yolk colostrum, the reasons that the solids are high, and actually some of these prebiotics, which are specifically designed for the young, immature gut to drive on the development of a healthy gut microbiome. In an ideal world, a lamb would be born through vaginal delivery naturally without any intervention, and would be exposed to good bacteria which would prime this young digestive tract, and if they got exposed to pathogens here, that the antibodies that the colostrum provided would provide protection. So in an ideal world, that's what we're looking for. We all know the reality for lambs is quite different, and that there's high what we call infection levels and various sources of pathogens. And there's lots of entry points for infection. Of course, orally is the main risk for E. coli, which is one of the most common pathogens we see in young lambs. So when we think about delivery, there's fecal material, of course, in the yolk that can be actually yolks carrying bugs that cause joint ill. If we're not using gloves and proper hygiene, if we're lambing ourselves, we can introduce infections. So the main source of infection is orally, and of course we have a lot of pathogens in the environment. So that's why we always stress hygiene, environment, straw. But of course there's a number of sources of entry points. So orally, nasally, if we look at tagging through the ears, a slight risk. The navel is another risk area. If we're docking tails, again using rubber rings or something like that, they can be entry points for infection. The main one is orally, but we really need to think about the sources of infection and how we can practically reduce them down. So if we think about our own hands and we're handling lambs, we can pass infections, lambing material, any materials we're using to contact lambs. So hygiene is really important. So we know the importance of reducing down that infection pressure. So the main elements for successful lamb rearing in real simple terms is getting colostrum quality right by looking at prepartum feeding, from my experience, practicing hygiene at lambing time. We have to be lambing ourselves if we're actually intervening, or actually lambing equipment, and also the lambing environment. We want to minimize dystocia or hard lambings, and we want real critical care around those lambs if they have had it. We want to, depending on the breed, hypothermia and cold is a risk. So plenty straw bedding, plenty insulation, and keeping things clean. So when we look at infectious diseases, which can be a big challenge for the newborn lamb, I talk about the seesaw. And this seesaw is very simple. We want to increase immunity and we want to reduce infection pressure. So we want to drive up immunity and we want to drive down infection pressure to reduce the challenges for the lamb. So think immunity and infection pressure is a really good point to actually assess. So I use checklists for looking at flock assessments, and we want to do everything we can. So we know the colostrum piece is really important in the young lamb, and infection pressure is the amount of bacteria that are exposed, that the lamb is exposed to. And we can think about that even prepartum. If we think about the udder and how clean we can keep that, when a young lamb gets up to suckle, it'll often nuzzle the belly, it'll nuzzle the legs, it'll nuzzle the back of the bag here. So we can reduce infection pressure on the actual yolks by having a clean environment. Well, that does reduce it down for lambs. We know that it's impossible to completely reduce it down, but it's an important concept to understand. Then if we look at the actual bedding itself, we want to look at the environment. So if we think about what do these pathogens like, they like moist, damp conditions where there's lots of feces and they can propagate. So we can look at fresh air flow, plenty bedding, good drainage, and that's the essential elements. Clean water troughs, so we don't have pathogens in water, and that's going to reduce down infection pressure. When we think about Precision Microbes Advanced Gut Stabiliser, it gets really interesting because what we're doing with this product, it's a part of our Advanced Gut Stabiliser range. So we're doing a number of things, primarily focused in the young lamb or kid at driving good gut health and priming that young gut. But also if we look at infection pressure, we're competing with pathogens as well. We've designed a formulation that's trying to compete with pathogens in the young lamb's stomach. So this allows Precision Microbes to really play a part in the seesaw balancing act and helping with overall lamb performance and stimulating immunity and reduction of infection pressure. So just by way of a little bit of background to the gut microbiome, when we think about microorganisms, we think about viruses, bacteria and fungi. When we collect them together in an area, that's the microbiota. So we have a gut microbiota, a skin microbiota, there's bacteria and soil, we call that the soil microbiota. So when we look at a microbiome then, this is a collection of microorganisms, tiny organisms like viruses, bacteria, protozoa and fungi, acting like an organ. So the gut microbiome in our young lambs and kids is a really important organ, if you like. And I refer to an organ because it's got a number of functionalities that directly impact health. And I think the gut microbiome, if we look across species, is an exciting area of research. And in lambs, it's equally as important. Okay. So from an animation perspective as well, these are my good bacteria. So it's billions and billions of good bacteria in the digestive tract of lambs and kids. So there is this interesting idea about bacteria, good versus bad. So none of us would be here, plants, animals or humans, without some innate defenses. And good bacteria can compete with harmful pathogens. They can block them, they can inhibit them, but a lot of it's done through the production of what we're going to talk about as we go along, postbiotic metabolites. So our good bacteria produce metabolites that compete with harmful bacteria and pathogens. So these postbiotics are really essential. And we all have good examples of postbiotics that have come from nature that are well known. So actually penicillin down here in the bottom right hand side, it was actually a mold that changed modern medicine. And actually a metabolite of that fungus, Penicillin rubens, later became known as the antibiotic penicillin. Also, there's another well-known molecule people will know, ivermectin. That was discovered as a postbiotic or metabolite of a Streptomyces bacteria by this guy, Satoshi Amuro. So we do understand more and more about how nature is working, particularly the beneficial effects of good bacteria, the metabolites they're producing, and how they're going to disrupt and inhibit harmful pathogens. So that's important when we look at some of the roles of postbiotics in a competition point of view. And again, two really good examples, penicillin and ivermectin, were both natural metabolites produced by a fungus or a bacteria, and we know the beneficial effects that they've had over the last decades. So this is interesting when, as a vet and maybe as farmers, when we look at pathogens. So as you saw in my seesaw effect, we're trying to drive down infection pressure. We're trying to look at how we can reduce that through good hygiene measures. But there is another area of bacteria we completely forget about, and this isn't to scale, but if we think about beneficial bacteria, the good bacteria in our digestive tract, they're part of the immune system of the young lamb. So a young lamb is born here with a sterile digestive tract and picks up the microorganisms through vaginal delivery and in the environment. And if we can look at it, harnessing and having good bacteria in the digestive tract in their best format possible, well, it makes complete sense that it's going to help with the immunity piece. So when we think about bacteria, we don't think about the pathogens because don't think always about the pathogens. Think about the beneficial bacteria that are there and their potential role in the seesaw effect and helping with immunity. So the lamb gut microbiome then. I suppose the question is what is the gut microbiome? So we know that in all animals we've got bacteria, beneficial bacteria, viruses, fungi and protozoa, primarily bacteria though, in our guts that are playing a number of key functions. So there's trillions of microbes in a lamb's digestive tract, and they're actually key to digestive health. And they're key to immune function. So 70% of the young lamb's immune system's in the digestive tract. That's because the digestive tract is a large, actually, surface area which is exposed to the digesta and pathogens from the environment, and we need local defenses there. So good bacteria play a key role. And the gut microbiome, the good bacteria, also compete with the harmful pathogens. So the lamb gut microbiome is a really important area in healthy lambs to help them get them going and thriving. The young lamb is born immunonaive with a sterile gut. We're trying to get colostrum in to support the immune system, but colostrum has also got prebiotics in it, which are the feed for good bacteria that help stimulate the development of the young lamb's gut. And this develops over the first few weeks of life in particular. So what we're targeting in precision microbes is our unique understanding of propagating microbes and propagating them in the best potential format, and we understand what's happening in the digestive tract. We're actually targeting helping gut development in young lambs. We've been doing that across other species like calves, horses and pets with great effect. And this is a very unique blend specifically for young lambs and kids. So we're targeting good gut health development. We want to target good gut health and understand that, okay, in an ideal world, the young lamb is exposed to good bacteria, but we know that there's lots of pathogens in the environment. We know that colostrum has got prebiotics in it, which helps stimulate the young gut, and also has got the antibodies, which helps with infection. But when we think about beneficial bacteria, they've also got a potential role to play in the propagation and helping setting up of the young gut. And finally, it's actually what these good bacteria produce, the postbiotics, which are really important. Now, there's lots of elements here, I understand, but it is absolutely key to the story and the challenge of the lamb indoors, is that in an ideal world, they would be exposed to good bacteria only, but we know that there's lots of pathogens in the environment and they're exposed to. We know the colostrum is involved in priming the young gut, but also immunity against these harmful pathogens. But beneficial bacteria that develop into the gut and what they produce, the postbiotics, have a role to play here. So we in Precision Microbes have a deep understanding of the mechanisms here across species, and we're creating solutions, propagating unique solutions that are aiding and supporting good gut health. So if we look at one of the challenges for the young lamb that a lot of people are very familiar with, unfortunately, is watery mouth. And this is caused by a pathogen called E. coli. And most E. coli, the source is feces. And there's lots of feces, and the primary risk is actually the mothers have it in their dung. They're totally immune to it, they're producing it, and so the young lamb is exposed. The problem with E. coli is it multiplies rapidly. And it's actually not the bacteria itself, but they actually produce metabolites or endotoxins, which cause a huge amount of systemic damage. So the endotoxins are absorbed, causing systemic or all the body of the lamb to be affected, and that's why they're so difficult to treat, because these lambs get what we call endotoxic shock a lot of times. So the symptoms we see around water belly come from that. The challenge for the young lamb is it's born with a high pH in the stomach, and that allows colostrum absorption and allows the antibodies to pass through to the digestive tract, but it also creates the perfect medium for rapid E. coli multiplication in the first hours and days of life. We have the perfect storm then if we have poor colostrum, which, less immunity, a hard lambing and the stress that causes, weak or cold lambs, again, weak and cold lambs depress immunity. If we've got triplets or, multi-parous lambs, well, that's a challenge. If we've poor hygiene and that high stomach pH creates the perfect storm. So the challenges are that, this infection gets into the young lamb's digestive tract, multiplies rapidly, produces these endotoxins. And, even with good antibodies, even with good colostrum, sometimes this can be a challenge on farm. And again, at a cellular level in the gut, these endotoxins are absorbed, causing the systemic effects we see with watery mouth. Now, this is where antibiotics have been used traditionally as a control, as a treatment, but primarily as a control. So we know that E. coli gets in there and there's a risk. So we're using antibiotics which actually kill these bacteria. They're very specific and designed to kill these bacteria. But we also know that antibiotics are not selective. They also can harm other potential beneficial bacteria. So we might be solving the E. coli problem, but they have other knock-on effects. We also know now that the regulations are changing, and for good reason, because we can get resistance issues with overuse of antibiotics. So antibiotics should never be used to prevent disease, and that's prophylaxis. They can still be used in certain circumstances, and they have a role to play. But they were very much at getting in quickly to stop the replication of E. coli. So new regulations, we're looking at alternative treatments, and it can be challenging, it's a challenge when you look at the word alternative. Now, there's a couple of things that have happened that have changed the game in this alternative space. We have a thing called metabolomics. We now understand more and more about how nature works, and we can, at Precision Microbes, become experts at propagating and developing solutions built on natural solutions, but again, from a key understanding at a metabolic level, actually what's happening. What do we need to propagate to get the results? So this is our story. Why are we different? So when we look at colostrum as prebiotics in it, we actually have prebiotics used in this propagation process. We also use live bacteria, which are probiotics or good bacteria. But key thing is we've developed a unique ability to culture bacteria to produce unique postbiotics in this complementary feed. So the postbiotic metabolites that we develop are very, very specific across species. So we identified the risks in lambs, and we went off researching and looking at in vitro and then in vivo out on farm, developing these products with very specific postbiotics that are propagated to look at the challenge of the young lamb. Okay, so this is important. Again, some just colors in here. So prebiotics are the feed for good bacteria, probiotics are the good bacteria themselves, and postbiotics are all important metabolites these bacteria produce. So we know that there's prebiotics in colostrum, and we're looking in our advanced gut stabilizers in the propagation process. We use prebiotics which are going to help set up to feed these good bacteria and the long-term development of good gut health in lambs. We've also propagated specific postbiotics based on the risks that young lambs face in the first hours of life. So there's a big difference between having bacteria in a liquid format like this with all their live postbiotics in the live bacteria with all their postbiotic metabolites in the liquids, and the unique prebiotic element as well. So in our advanced gut stabilizer range, we're bringing the elements of pre, pro and postbiotics for this complementary feed. And again, if we look at what we're doing here versus, other products that are using freeze-dried bacteria that have to reactivate, rehydrate, get past stomach, and then produce their metabolites. We're providing the bacteria and the metabolites and using propagation techniques to have them their best format possible. And again, we have to understand that watery mouth is quite different. So one of the early research works we did was with our different blends we had created for calves using pro and postbiotics that were designed specifically for gut health support and biological stabilization. But what we learned was that E. coli is rapidly multiplying. So the competition we had when the other products worked well in calves is not good enough for lambs. So we wanted something that was going to compete faster with E. coli, that was more tailored and specific. So we looked at a more specific propagation process that gave us postbiotics, particularly targeted at E. coli and its replication. So that's what our advanced gut stabilizer for lambs is doing. The postbiotics in the liquid are a different blend, are more based around certain postbiotics. We know that they've been designed specifically to target that risk of E. coli and that propagation period. So we're looking at, also the prebiotics and the good bacteria that were used to develop the product. Also, not only are we targeting E. coli, but we're also looking at better gut health. It's not an antibiotic, even though postbiotics and metabolites in the past have been formatted from antibiotics. We're not claiming it, but we do understand the mechanisms around E. coli and the very specific postbiotics that we have created in this blend. So that really is a unique element to what we can do. We've a very incredible ability to, I suppose, a range of microbes at our disposal, and the researchers are able to look at formulations, test them in vitro, and then we go out onto farm and look at their activity. So the product does contain prebiotics and probiotics in the blend to kickstart the young lamb's immature gut microbiome as well. So we're helping and certainly targeting, supporting that E. coli risk, but we're really supporting overall better gut health. So the product can be dosed at birth. It's quite a high dose, but if you want to see an effect, and we've worked on dose rates, and everyone would love a small dose rate. This is the effective dose that we're seeing working really, really well. It can be used 6 mils once off at birth, or used supportively to treat lambs that have had issues or in high risk situations. You can use it on day 2 as well. So here's the dose rates again. So a 300 ml bottle will do 50 lambs, and that's a once-off dose at birth. It can be repeated, or it can be used as supportively as well to support maybe lambs that are recovering for dysentery or other scours as an aid to supporting better digestive health and that recovery period post-infections or dysentery or dysbiosis. But primarily the product is designed for the young lamb to support digestive health at birth. So we in Ireland here, we've worked with a number of vets. We had done initial trials with our original blends and we weren't satisfied. So in 2021 season, we went into a number of flocks. It was 13, but actually the product was used in a lot more. And we targeted 6 flocks in 2 vet practices that had problems previously with E. coli. They were taking out the oral antibiotic treatments. And these had long histories of issues. Some of them also had issues with joint ill. Every lamb received 6 mils, and we tracked lamb performance E. coli incidence over those 12 flocks. No issues occurred, and actually the vets themselves used the products in more flocks outside of the trials as well, because they saw the benefits of the product. Again, it's a supportive product for young lambs. Management is key, as you'll read from both these vet testimonials. We also used a product in a vet had contacted us who was using our calf products and wondering had we anything for lambs in an organic flock that was in the middle of an E. coli outbreak, and we actually used it in the face of an outbreak with exceptionally good results. It stopped the problem in its tracks without any antibiotic treatments, which was really interesting. So incredibly positive feedback on the product from the 2021 season. So we're launching now, sorry, that actually was the 2022 season. I've made a mistake there. So we're launching now into the lamb market for the 22-23 season. And I think this is going to be a game changer in lamb gut health and supportive care, understanding the challenges of the lamb and providing a product that's going to help support better good gut health and specifically designed for the challenges of that young lamb. So that's the Precision Microbes Advanced Gut Stabiliser for lambs and kids. It's licensed for both, so a really exciting range of products from our range in Precision Microbes that includes calves, horses and pets. And this is the newest one, the Advanced Gut Stabiliser for lambs and kids. Any questions, contact us on info@precisionmicrobes.com and we'll answer any questions people have, and we're delighted to take any feedback as well. So good luck for the lambing season in 2023, and looking forward to feedback on the Advanced Gut Stabiliser for lambs. Thank you very much for listening.